On today's show, more players are already showing up at practice. Who are the latest names? I'll discuss next on this edition of Locked On Capitals.
Your Locked On Capitals, your daily podcast on the Washington Capitals. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Well, hello and welcome into this edition of Locked On Capitals, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. My name is Dan Holme. I've covered the Capitals for the past 3 seasons for Locked On and various other outlets before that. I'm also the host of the weekly show called The Capitals Minutecast, available wherever you find your podcasts. And as always, I want to thank you for making this your first listen of the day. Today's episode is brought to you by our friends at FanDuel. Football season is around the corner. Visit the FanDuel app today and start planning your futures bets now. So in this edition of Locked On Capitals, more and more players are trickling into MedStar. Let's get hyped already for the start of the new season. TVR and Milano are 2 of the players that have showed up. What's the latest with those players? A bit later, we'll talk about the Pro Bros. I'm talking Ilya and Aliaksei Protas. Aliaksei Protas has been very pleased with his brother's progress. Where does he slot into with the Capitals organization? And then we'll talk about Sandin and what has been going on overseas with him. But just to get it going here, talking about the excitement as a true harbinger of the start of the hockey season, as you're starting to see more and more players trickle in at MedStar Ice Complex, and the feeling of hockey is in the air. And for me, as a hockey fan, it feels like it has been too long. So to see the wheels start moving, we've seen John Carlson kind of leading some of these informal practices here. There is a feeling that the Capitals have a chip on their shoulder, that they are ready to prove to the NHL at large that we're ready to take it to the next level. And when you look at some of the players that are there already, wouldn't necessarily have to be established NHL veterans, but they are. So let's dive into that in the first segment of today's show. And, like I was saying, it's a good feeling. The closer we get to training camp, seeing more players trickle in. And the latest names are Dylan Strome and Trevor van Riemsdyk. And Strome and TVR joining the crew that's already amassed at MedStar Ice Complex, and the hunger to impress, right? I think that the Capitals making it to the second round of the playoffs is a good thing, of course, but I think that the fans are longing for more. And those 2 players join a list of players that have been there: Pierre-Luc Dubois, Nick Dowd, John Carlson, and Sonny Milano. Now you can add Strome and TVR to that mix, and the room is starting to fill up. And I guess everyone is waiting for the main event, and I think we know what the main event is here. It's Alex Ovechkin showing up here. So as we take a look at it, these are just casual skates right now, but this is how it always starts, just this slow ramp up. This is how the chemistry begins with the players, that kind of thing, that, players that are a little bit more familiar to the organization, some players fighting for roster spots. I'm talking about Sonny Milano, those kind of things that I think that, getting in that extra work, I think is endearing to the organization to see that, hey, this team is ready to get serious. But it wasn't all pros there. We saw some local pros, a few college kids, but that's pretty normal for this time of year as things continue to get going. And sometimes you even see players that were once Capitals practicing with the team. So it is pretty par for the course. But one of the players that I expect to take a step forward even further than what we saw from him last season is Dylan Strome, because you take a look at the season that he had last season, and he is the guy that stirs the drink at that first line center position that we need to see an engaged Dylan Strome. And I have no doubt he put up career best 82 points, 29 goals in 53 3 assists. That, if you're doing math at home, is a point per game production. And a very big part of that first line that features Alex Ovechkin, of course. We've seen Protas play on the right wing and Tom Wilson, those kind of things. But Dylan Strome is the guy that had to pick up the baton after Nick Backstrom went on the LTIR and subsequently is now playing over back in Sweden. And, like I've talked about on the show, and if you're an everydayer, I don't think that at the time the Capitals went out and acquired Dylan Strome to be the replacement for Nick Backstrom. It's just, I guess what I'm going to say, a pleasant surprise that is what it turned out to be. And you take a look at his last season. It wasn't just, like an empty calorie season, shall we say. He was top 20 in the entire NHL in scoring. That's quite a feather in your hat. That's quite an accomplishment. That is big time for Dylan Strome, the ultimate competitor, a guy that likes to nerd out on hockey stats, not just his own stats, but stats of other Capitals and NHL players. This guy eats it, walks it, talks it. He loves hockey. And he's only the 4th Capitals player not named Alex Ovechkin to put up an 80-point season in the Ovi era. That's a pretty rare thing. And, again, if you're not aware, I'll catch you up here a little bit, is that Dylan Strome was the guy that was kind of put on the scrap heap by the Chicago Blackhawks. The Capitals scooped him up, a name I was familiar with. I had no idea he was going to be this good, but he has been just that. And, it's all about answering the bell on the big stage. And he did just that as well. It's one thing to have, a good regular season, but can you push that on over to the postseason? He did that. 11 points in 10 games, 2 goals, 9 assists. He was the guy that kept it going for the Capitals. When some Capitals players kind of disappeared in the playoffs, I'm talking about Pierre-Luc Dubois in particular, not the only one. It's a good thing to know that there is players out there that know how to play under the big lights, under the big pressure, and you can circle Dylan Strome's name on that list. And that's why he's locked into the OV center again this season. I have no doubt. There was some question when the Capitals traded for and acquired Pierre-Luc Dubois if he was going to be that first line center. But as it turns out, Dylan Strome has been that hand in glove perfect fit between Stromer and Ovi has been huge. And that's chemistry that they've been working on for 2 years now. And I don't see that changing anytime soon. The thing of it is say for some reason there is a dip in production. What do we know about Carbery is that he is not opposed to making changes, as we saw that last year. We had the lines and deep pairings all penciled in, and they lost in the first game there. And all of a sudden, he just shook it all up and not afraid of making changes. But right out of the gate, it is going to be Stromer on that first line at center with Ovi. And I think that this is going to be a really great season for Strome and Ovechkin, who, as we know, is entering into the final year of his contract. All right, so coming up here after the break, we'll talk about Trevor van Riemsdyk and Sonny Milano straight ahead. Most people can't name all their financial accounts or even what they're worth, whether it's 401ks, properties, or investments. And when you don't have the full picture, you can end up leaving money on the table. That's where Monarch Money comes in. It's an all-in-one personal finance tool that brings your entire financial life together in one clean, easy to use interface on your laptop or on your phone. Monarch is built for people with busy lives. If you're putting off organization, your finances, Monarch is for you. Monarch does the heavy lifting. You can link all your accounts in minutes, see clear data visuals, get smart categorization of your spending, and finally feel in control of your money without ever touching a spreadsheet. And the thing I love about it is they were able to take a look at my finances and determine where I was spending my money wisely and maybe where it needed improvement. I was saving for retirement, a good thing. Too much on food delivery and sports memorabilia, guilty. And a bigger picture, if you are involved in with a significant other, they can help you plan your financial future together. I know you're going to love it. So don't let financial opportunities slip through the cracks. Use Locked On NHL at monarchmoney.com in your browser for half off your first year. That's 50% off your first year at monarchmoney.com with the code LOCKEDONNHL. All right, welcome back into this edition of Locked On Capitals, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. You can find me over on Twitter. It's at DanCaps218. You can find the show on Twitter. It's at Locked On Caps. So in the second segment, we're talking about players showing up at camp, players that have something to prove, players, some players that are entering into their final year under contract years. TVR, John Carlson, Alex Ovechkin, all in that category. And TVR is the guy that, kind of just goes about his business. Not a flashy, not a sexy name in the NHL per se, but he is a guy that can get it done on a night in and night out basis. And like I say, TVR is one of those guys you don't always hear about. Not flashy. He's not putting up the highlight reel goals, but he's steady. And steady is huge. You don't always need to be the showboat. You don't need to be this over-the-top player. But it's steady, it's reliability, and last season he played all 82 games. Huge for a Capitals blue line that in years before had seen injuries that snuck into focus and kind of changed the outlook of the season. I'm thinking John Carlson. I'm thinking more recently about Marty Faravari last season. But, for a guy that's been in the league for quite some time, first time he's done that as a Capital. That's durability, that's reliability, and that is what coaches love. You don't got to worry about TVR. You know that he is going to be good to go if he's healthy, and he is a guy that is kind of that steady presence there. Now, there is some talk about these players that are entering into contract years. TVR in particular, a lot like John Carlson, is what do the Capitals plan on doing with them? Do they plan on signing them to an extension? And if not, would they be better off served trading these players so they can get a return for them? Otherwise, they get nothing. But talking about his production, as it's been good, I'm not I don't want to boot him out of town. I think that TVR holds some value. Of course, the durability, what I'm talking about here. Can they get a contract done? That's the big thing here. He finished the year with 21 points, 1 goal, 20 assists, played a big role on the PK. And you really can't understate that, as sometimes, just doing this show, and if you're an everydayer, I've spoke about special teams and that getting drawn into focus. So if you can have a guy like TVR that can be that steady presence, that is huge. But, like I talked about there a bit ago, he is entering into that final year of his contract. It was $9 million signed all the way back in 22-23. So it is a contract year for him. And oftentimes in contract years, that is when you see the best out of those players, because they're either playing for their future on the current team. If not, they're planning for their future on wherever their next stop is in the NHL. Think Anthony Mantha, a bit ago there, where he had a horrible season, started scoring goals in his contract season, and then found a home outside of Washington. And you always think to yourself, where was that the season before? That I think there is an increased hunger to really bring it, because you are fighting for your future in the NHL. Talking about players that are also fighting for their future in the NHL is Sonny Milano. Yeah, you remember him. Hard to forget those silky mitts and sneaky shot that we've seen from him when he was dialed in. A bit hot and cold, I guess I would say, is the big knock on him. But, some things we really can't hold against him. He was injured for a lion's share of last season, only played 3 games. It's hard to impress in 3 games. And the hard part about Sonny Milano finding a future with the Capitals is all the young players in the pipeline moving their way down the pipeline, right? I'm talking Crystal, I'm talking Miro, Ryan Leonard, these kind of guys that if they're not up for it, Henrik Slop-Pierre, you could put in that category as well, that there is a lot of young talent making its way to the top. But, like I said, you can't really hold that against him last season. You're injured, even though it seems a bit interesting. There was no major glaring injury that we found out about, but he only played 3 games. Was it roster management? A bit conspiratorial, I guess, is what you could say for him. But the question is, like I said, can he carve out a spot? Because the lineup is crowded. And I think, like I've talked about on this show, that you are going to see the Capitals leaning into the youth like you've never seen before. That they went out and they tried to acquire Nikolai Ehlers, that they were kicking the tires on Jack Roslovic. And up to now, the only moves that the Capitals made this offseason was for Justin Sordoff and Declan Chisholm. They made some other acquisitions to plug some holes in Hershey that I guess could benefit the Capitals next season if called upon. We also saw the contract extension of Anthony Beauvillier. That, to my point, the Capitals are leaning into the youth, but the one thing that Sonny Milano has going for him is he's a veteran, right? That we know approximately what we have in the tank with Sonny Milano, that these young guys like Ryan Leonard, which I spoke about, played in the latter part of last season. He scored 1 empty netter. And I know that he's going to do more next year, but what if they have Crystal and Crystal isn't sustainable, or Miro, that, if you didn't go out and get Roslovic, that you have Sonny Milano in-house to kind of push these young guys. And that is where I think the role that he is trying to fit in here, that, he did miss, let's face it, pretty much the entirety of last season. He needs to prove to the Capitals brass that I belong here. And this is the kind of skill set that I bring as a veteran that has more hours or miles, if you will, on his NHL odometer, of course, than Andrew Crystal, Ivan Miroshnichenko, Ryan Leonard, these kind of guys. Because like I say, when I look back on my notes, I oftentimes have notes for players when the Capitals first come here, acquired. And we know that he was originally slated to play in Hershey. I put down that he had a good nose for the puck. I still think that holds true. And the video footage that we have seen from him at MedStar is the very best version of Sonny Milano that I think we have ever seen. That there's nothing holding him back. I don't sense any lingering issues with his injury. So I think that if he cracks the roster, I think that we will see an engaged Sonny Milano. Will he be on the forward combos, starting night in, night out, or will he spend it as a healthy scratch? That is a question as well, because the Capitals are going to need some depth if called upon. We see that on the blue line. You'll need that with the forwards as well. But Sonny Milano will be fighting, in fact, for a roster spot, whether that is playing night in or night out, or if it means that he is going to be watching it up in the press box in his fancy clothes. I think he's going to be comfortable collecting that sweet NHL money. All right, so coming up here after the break, we'll talk about the Pro Bros. I'm talking Ilya. I'm talking Aliaksei, the future of both of those players, and Sandin overseas. Straight ahead. We have an important request. Locked On wants to hear from you. We've put together a survey to learn more about our listeners and make your favorite podcasts even better. This is your chance to tell us what you like, what you don't, and to answer questions about our advertising. Go to lockedonpodcast.com/survey to get started. Everyone who completes a survey will be entered for a chance to win one of 10 $100 Amazon gift cards. Again, that's lockedonpodcast.com/survey. You can also find the link in the show notes. Thanks for helping us out. The NFL season is almost here, and FanDuel is making sure you're ready for kickoff with a can't-miss offer. Right now, new customers can bet just $5, and if your bet wins, you'll get $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. Now, listen, the NFL season is going to be starting real soon, and I know if you're a lot like me, that you're probably pretty excited about it as well. And the thing I love about FanDuel is it makes every game more exciting, whether you're watching your team or just keeping an eye on your fantasy lineup. It's a quick and easy way to bet on odds and add a little bit more energy to Sundays. So, are you ready to play? Download the FanDuel app right now by visiting FanDuel.com to get started. That's FanDuel.com to place your first $5 bet. All right, welcome back into this edition of Locked On Capitals, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. The best way that you can help grow the show is to subscribe to Locked On Capitals on YouTube and comment anything down below. So in the final segment of today's show, we are talking about the Protas brothers. I'm talking Alexei, which we know, an established player in the NHL, put up career numbers last year, and his younger brother, Ilya, no, not riding around on his brother's coattails, a legit threat, a future big-time player in the NHL on the Capitals. Let's dive into that. There's still a lot to get to in the final segment of today's show. So when you look at the Protas brothers, you think to yourself, what are the odds that both of these players can be great players? Well, what do we remember about Aliaksei Protas not too long ago? Entered into camp, kind of a long shot, this guy, this big frame, a great skater, great shot, all those kind of things, came to this team, and there was questions about what kind of player he would be. And what did we get? We got a player that played so well that even though he wasn't penciled in to play on the big team, impressed, and ultimately why he found his way on to the roster. And a huge piece, of course, for the Capitals last season. But his brother, Ilya Protas, like I said, is quite a player as well and ready to take it to the next level for the Capitals. And if you're not familiar, the kid absolutely torched it in the OHL, 50 goals, 74 assists. That's 124 points in 61 games. So it is, not something that is like a flash in the pan, like, oh, he's okay. No, if you're putting up those kind of numbers, that's an indicator that you're ready for more. And if you talk to his brother, he knows what kind of player he is. Is there the chance that he sneaks his way onto the Capitals next season at some point if he really brings it? I guess I don't want to sell him short, but the production that we saw from him last season is insane. And to put this in perspective, this isn't just me being a homer for the Capitals. The only guy ahead of him was Michael Misa, the number 2 overall pick. So yeah, I'm going to say the ceiling is high for Ilya Protas. And just think, having Alexei and Ilya on the same team together, this team, like I've talked about, you think is good right now, is going to be exponentially better in years to come. And Alexei said this summer was huge for Ilya, that they've been training together in Belarus, off-ice work, on-ice work, all of it, that, Alexei as well, he doesn't want to take any steps back, that, you put up career numbers in a big way, huge jump than what we've seen from him in seasons before, that we want to continue to see that jump together. Now, both brothers are coming back to DC for camp soon. Now, does Ilya make an NHL roster right out of the gate? Probably not. But, hey, I'm here to tell you a really early take. I'm not saying that he will make it, but I'm saying let's not sell him short. This was the same thing that we heard about Alexei, that, this guy's good, but wow, we didn't know what kind of player we had. So probably, really early take, won't make the team out of camp. But he's going to get a look. He is going to get his opportunity. And if we get even a small glimpse of what we saw from him in the OHL, I think the sky's the limit. And he's giving, the Capitals a lot of reason to believe in his upside. So that's a big thing for the Capitals as well, is the pipeline, and I think is ready just to take it to the next level. Another player that has been making waves in the offseason here is Rasmus Sandin in Milan during the NHLPA European Player Media Tour, that he was recently on the 32 Thoughts podcast and talked about, how much the Capitals have improved under Spencer Carbery. And, I don't think that head coaches oftentimes get enough credit. But they do, because you remember, before when it was Peter Laviolette and the Capitals were good, but Spencer Carbery has just revolutionized. And I don't mean that with hyperbole. I really think he has. He understands the youth better than I think we've seen a Capitals coach in years. And, Rasmus Sandin was singing his praises as well. And you could see it last season. He's not just the offensive guy anymore. Talking Sandin here, he's confident in the D zone. I think that he has tried to put aside some of his beliefs on what kind of player he should be. That there were talk that he was trying to emulate Erik Karlsson at a point in his younger career. And then he realized, that's not my game. I might look up to him, but that's not what kind of player that I am. But he's doing, the things that we necessarily hadn't seen from him before, doing a lot better. He's handled tough matchups well. He's stronger without the puck. And that's something, you maybe don't hear all the time, is responsibility without the puck. We know, a lot of players are good, but to put yourself in the right spot, even when you're not in possession of the puck, is huge. He said that Carbery and Mitch Loved worked with him every day to make him a better all-around player. And, well, the proof's in the pudding for the Capitals. We're talking blue line in particular, but even to go up a bit further, big picture for this team in a big way. And, you take a look at Spencer Carbery, the ultimate competitor that wants to win every night, and he takes a look at the tools that he has out on the ice. You got to know that Rasmus Sandin is one of those big pieces for him on the blue line, and he helped elevate a player and make them even better than what we've seen before. And like I say, that is a huge thing for the blue line moving forward. And, with some questions there, right? I talked about that a bit earlier, that we don't know the future of John Carlson. We don't know the future of TVR. Both players entering into contract years, they very well could play through the entire season and see what happens. But you need those building blocks for the future. And Rasmus Sandin is definitely one of the future big pieces on the Capitals blue line. And what has me excited about the future of this team, that I think that, they made some moves. They weren't too reluctant to make change, that they're not in the same position as, let's say, the Pittsburgh Penguins, who are, coming right up on a wall here, like, we held on to this lineup too long. The Capitals were forward-thinking. Former GM Brian McClellan was forward-thinking enough to help address potential pitfalls in the future. Make no mistake about it. Circle, underline, boldface, is that Sandin is going to be a huge part, and I expect him to, for his game to even improve next season. All right. Once again, I want to thank you for joining me on this edition of Locked On Capitals, your only daily podcast covering the Capitals. And I want to thank all of you that listen on the audio side and watch this on YouTube. You are what makes this show successful. When you're done here, head on over to Locked On NHL, as they have you covered 5 days a week, available wherever you find your podcasts and on YouTube. All right. Once again, I want to thank you for joining me on this edition of Locked On Capitals, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. It is your team every day. My name is Dan Holme, and I'll talk to you again next time.